Welcome back, everybody. Today, we're going to be doing a deep dive into something pretty fascinating and timely, Hanukkah. It's coming up. We're using some really cool sources for you, Wikipedia, My Jewish Learning, and History.com. We're going to get right into it. And I think you might be surprised to learn some of the things we found. So, like a lot of people know, Hanukkah is also known as Chanukah. And it is a Jewish festival. It's not really a Sabbath-like holiday, but it's more like a time for rejoicing and celebrating, a historical victory. But here's something you might not know. The Hanukkah story actually doesn't appear in the Torah.
That's right. The events that actually inspired Hanukkah, they took place after the Torah was written, during a period that's known as the Second Temple period. And it was a really, really pivotal time in Jewish history.
So let's dive into this world. Judea under the Seleucid Empire. Was this like a time of peace and coexistence, or were tensions kind of already brewing?
It wasn't a simple black and white situation. It was very complicated, especially in that time period. Under Antiochus III, who ruled before the conflict that we know as Hanukkah, things were relatively peaceful. He allowed the Jews to practice their religion and live according to, their own customs.
So then what changed? When did things start to kind of shift?
Well, that all changed with the arrival of Antiochus the Epiphanes. And he was a different type of ruler with a different vision for Judea. He wanted to impose Hellenistic culture and really encourage assimilation.
Wait, hold on. What exactly does Hellenistic culture mean in this context?
That's a great question. It essentially means that Antiochus V was pushing for the adoption of Greek language and customs, religion, and all sorts of social practices. And you can imagine this caused a lot of tension within the Jewish community at that time. Some people embraced these changes. They became what were known as Hellenized Jews. But of course, many others clung to traditional Jewish practices and resisted this cultural shift.
So you have this internal conflict brewing within the Jewish community. You have traditionalists clashing with those who are embracing Hellenistic culture. But how does Antiochus V fit into all of this? Was he just a neutral observer, or was he kind of taking sides?
Well, Antiochus V wasn't just sitting on the sidelines. He actively supported the Hellenized Jews and took measures to actually suppress traditional Jewish practices. This eventually led to those infamous decrees outlawing Judaism.
Wow. Outlawing a whole religion, that's a pretty drastic move. What kinds of things were actually being outlawed?
We're talking about banning circumcision, Sabbath observance, studying the Torah, basically anything that made Judaism unique. And this wasn't just symbolic. There were very real consequences for those who disobeyed, sometimes even death.
This is where things get really heated.
Right.
This is what ignites the Maccabean revolt.
Exactly. This is where we meet Mattathias, who was a Jewish priest, and his 5 sons, including, of course, the very famous Judah Maccabee, who led the revolt against the Seleucid Empire.
Judah Maccabee. So tell me about him. What made him such a pivotal figure in the story?
Judah Maccabee is really a legendary figure in Jewish history. He's often depicted as, this fearless warrior. But what's really interesting is he actually wasn't a trained military leader. He was a priest who was kind of forced into this role of a general. But he was, brilliant, a brilliant strategist and tactician. He really understood the terrain. He knew how to use guerrilla warfare to his advantage. And he inspired his troops to fight with incredible courage against a much larger and, much better equipped army.
So this wasn't just like a small-scale rebellion. What were the odds that were stacked against them? What made their victory so improbable?
I mean, the Maccabees were very, very vastly outnumbered. They were going up against the might of the Seleucid Empire, which was, one of the most powerful empires of the ancient world. The Seleucid army was a professional force, advanced weaponry, and tons more experience in warfare. So it's really a David versus Goliath kind of story.
Wow. I mean, they were truly fighting for survival. Their way of life, religious freedom, everything was kind of on the line here. So how did they pull it off? How did they overcome such overwhelming odds?
It's a really remarkable story. The Maccabees were fighting for something so much bigger than themselves, and their determination and resilience were just incredible. But they were also very clever in their military strategies. They used the terrain to their advantage, launched surprise attacks, and exploited weaknesses in the Seleucid ranks. It took years of fighting, but they eventually managed to drive the Seleucid forces out of Jerusalem.
Okay, this is where it gets really exciting. The Maccabees have reclaimed Jerusalem, and now they have to figure out what to do next.
Right,
Yeah.
Exactly. They had liberated the city, but the Second Temple, the holiest site in Judaism, had been desecrated.
So this is where the rededication of the temple comes in, right? The event that Hanukkah actually commemorates. What did that look like? What did they do to reclaim that sacred space?
Judah Maccabee, ordered the temple to be cleansed and purified. They built a new altar. New holy vessels were made. And of course, the menorah, the seven-branch candelabrum, needed to be rekindled.
Ah, the menorah. I know that's a symbol that's very, closely associated with Hanukkah today. But what is the significance of rekindling the menorah specifically?
Well, the menorah was more than just a lamp. It was a symbol of God's presence, a reminder of the covenant between God and the Jewish people. By rekindling the menorah, they were symbolically reestablishing that connection, proclaiming that their faith had endured, despite attempts to extinguish it.
So this is where we get to the most famous aspect of Hanukkah, the miracle of the oil. Tell me more about that.
Well, the Talmud, a central text of rabbinic Judaism, tells the story. When the Maccabees went to relight the menorah, they only found a single container of pure olive oil, just enough to burn for one day.
Wait, so they only had enough oil for one day? That's not a lot of time to, go find more oil. What did they do?
Well, they lit the menorah anyway. And miraculously, that tiny amount of oil lasted for 8 full nights.
8 nights, just long enough to prepare a new batch.
It is. It is quite a story. It's a story of resilience, of faith, and of course, of a miraculous event that became central to the celebration of Hanukkah.
So we've talked about this incredible story of rebellion and victory and this miraculous event, but how does all of this translate into how Hanukkah is celebrated today? How do people bring this story to life?
That's where we'll pick up next time when we dive into the rituals and traditions that make Hanukkah such a vibrant and meaningful celebration.
So we left off with the Maccabees reclaiming the temple and, of course, that amazing miracle of the oil. I'm really curious how all this history and symbolism, translates into Hanukkah today, like what we see celebrated around us.
It is fascinating how Hanukkah, which was born out of this, struggle for religious freedom, ultimately evolved into this beautiful celebration of light and joy.
Okay, so what are some of those key traditions that really, bring this Hanukkah story to life?
The central ritual, of course, is lighting the Hanukkah menorah, which is also known as a Hanukkah.
Oh, the Hanukkah. I've definitely seen those around. Is that the 9-branched candelabrum that people often display in their windows around this time of year?
Yeah, exactly. It has 8 branches to represent the 8 nights of Hanukkah, plus a 9th branch called the shamash, which is used to light the other candles.
Okay, so walk me through this nightly ritual. How does it work?
So each night, after sundown, you add another candle to the menorah, working right to left. You always light the candles from left to right, using the shamash to kindle each flame. And as you light the candles, you recite blessings, thanking God for the miracles and wonders of Hanukkah.
I love how the ritual just perfectly connects back to the miracle of the oil, with the lights just burning brighter and brighter each night. And I imagine these menorahs in the windows, they're not just for decoration.
Right, you got it.
Yeah.
Placing the menorah in the window is all about, publicizing the miracle, sharing the light of Hanukkah with the world.
It's such a powerful symbol, especially when you think about that historical context. The Maccabees fought so hard to keep their faith alive, and now people are literally putting that light on display, for everybody to see.
Yeah, exactly. It's a testament to the enduring power of faith and tradition.
So I know there's more to Hanukkah than just the candles, right? What about those delicious looking, oil-based treats that I keep seeing? Do they have any connection to the Hanukkah story?
Absolutely. Remember the miracle of the oil? Eating foods fried in oil is a delicious way to commemorate that event. We're talking latkes, those crispy potato pancakes, and sufganiyot, those amazing jelly donuts, like little pillows of fried doughy goodness.
So you've got the light, you've got delicious food. Anything else? What about music? Games?
Of course. No Hanukkah celebration would be complete without singing Hanukkah songs. Like Masur is the classic one, a song that tells that story of the Maccabean revolt and celebrates the triumph of faith over oppression.
And what about those spinning tops I see? The ones with the Hebrew letters on each side. They have something to do with Hanukkah, right?
You're talking about the dreidel. It's a classic. And it's actually believed to have originated during a time when Jews were forbidden from studying Torah. So they kind of disguised their learning as a simple game. They'd hide their Torah scrolls and pretend to be gambling with dreidels if anyone came around.
Wow, that's clever. So what started as a way to protect their religious practices has now become this fun game people play during Hanukkah.
Exactly. Today, it's just a fun way to bring people together, especially kids, during Hanukkah.
I love how those traditions blend history, faith, and just plain fun. So from these ancient origins to these modern celebrations, what would you say is the lasting significance of Hanukkah?
I think Hanukkah is ultimately a celebration of resilience, victory, and the enduring power of faith and tradition. It reminds us that even in the face of overwhelming odds, hope and light can prevail.
That's a beautiful message, especially relevant during the holiday season. It seems like a very universal message, one that resonates with, a lot of different cultures and traditions. But I mean, it sounds like Hanukkah has also evolved, right? Especially like how it's celebrated in North America.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. In North America, particularly in the late 20th century, Hanukkah's prominence really grew, often seen as like a Jewish alternative to Christmas.
Yeah, I can see that. A celebration of light and joy happening around the same time as Christmas. It makes sense that it would gain popularity, especially in like a predominantly Christian society.
Exactly. And with that increased prominence, you also see the commercialization of Hanukkah.
Hmm.
Hanukkah gifts, decorations, those have all become, increasingly popular, which is interesting to see.
It's interesting how history repeats itself.
Right.
I mean, Christmas's own rise in importance happened in the 1800s. It's like mirroring what we're seeing with Hanukkah now. They both kind of evolved within their own specific cultural contexts, which is fascinating.
That's a really insightful observation.
Mhm.
It speaks to the way that traditions adapt and evolve within different cultural contexts. So while Hanukkah began as this ancient story of resistance and religious freedom, it's really taken on these new layers of meaning and significance as it's been embraced and reinterpreted by different generations and communities.
Okay, so we've covered the origins of Hanukkah, we've explored these really rich traditions, and we've touched on its evolving significance. It's been a fascinating journey. But before we wrap up, what's like one key takeaway that you want our listener to leave with? What's the one thing you really want them to remember about Hanukkah?
I think it's crucial to remember that Hanukkah at its core is about hope, resilience, and the power of faith and tradition to overcome adversity. It's a story that has resonated with people for centuries and continues to offer inspiration and hope in the face of challenges.
That's a really powerful message for all of us, regardless of like background or beliefs. So as we approach Hanukkah this year, what's one final thought-provoking question we can leave our listener with?
How about this? How has Hanukkah's meaning and celebration evolved in your own family or community? Maybe you have unique family traditions or have seen how the holiday has adapted to the modern world.
I love that. It's an invitation for our listener to reflect on the personal and communal aspects of this, really special holiday.
Yeah.
Wow, this deep dive has been quite a journey. We've gone from ancient empires and epic battles to delicious food and spinning tops.
It really shows you how much history can be packed into just a single holiday. And speaking of history, I think it's really interesting how the Hanukkah story itself has been interpreted in different ways over the centuries.
Oh, that's a great point. We kind of touched on this earlier, but maybe we can unpack it a bit more. You mentioned, the traditional view of Hanukkah as like a story of religious oppression versus the more nuanced perspective of some modern historians who see it more as a civil war,
Yeah.
between traditional and Hellenized Jews. So like, what are some of the key differences in those interpretations?
Well, the traditional view, the one that most people are probably familiar with, really emphasizes that religious conflict. It focuses on Antiochus V as like this tyrannical figure who wanted to force the Jews to abandon their faith. And the Maccabees are seen as these heroic defenders of religious freedom.
Right, it's that classic good versus evil narrative
Yeah.
with the forces of faith, triumphing over tyranny. It's a powerful story, and it makes sense that it would resonate with people, especially those who have experienced religious persecution themselves.
Absolutely. But modern historians have started to question whether it was really that simple. They pointed out that there were like these complex social and political factors at play as well.
Okay, so what are some of those complexities? Like what else was going on in Judea at the time that might have contributed to this whole conflict?
Well, for one thing, there were already divisions within the Jewish community itself. The Hellenized Jews were actually a significant portion of the population. They had adopted, Greek language and culture and saw assimilation as like a path to advancement in society.
So it wasn't just a conflict between the Jews and the Seleucid Empire. It was also about like these internal divisions within the Jewish community itself.
Exactly. It was a clash of cultures, values, even ideas about, what it even meant to be Jewish in that time period.
I see. So like maybe Antiochus the Sempos wasn't just this like evil villain who just hated Judaism. Maybe he was also trying to exploit those internal divisions, to solidify his own control over Judea.
That's one possible interpretation.
Yeah.
And it shows how history is, rarely just black and white. There are often multiple perspectives, multiple motivations at play.
It kind of reminds me of that saying, history is written by the victors, right? It makes you wonder how the Hanukkah story might have been told differently if, the Seleucid Empire had won.
That's a great point. It's a reminder that even the stories we think we know so well can be more complex than we realize. And it's important to approach history, with a critical eye, to consider all the different viewpoints and interpretations.
Totally agree. It's what makes history so fascinating. There's always more to learn, more layers to uncover.
Exactly. And even though, the Hanukkah story took place centuries ago, it still has so much to teach us today.
Yeah.
It reminds us that even ordinary people can do these extraordinary things when they're fighting for what they believe in. It highlights the importance of standing up for your values, for your traditions, even when things get tough.
Mm.
And it shows us that hope and light can prevail even, in the darkest of times.
Beautifully said. Those are messages that, resonate deeply, no matter your background or your beliefs.
And that's the power of stories like Hanukkah. They transcend time and culture,
Yeah.
connecting us to something larger than ourselves.
So for our listener who's been with us on this incredible Hanukkah journey, what's one final thought-provoking question we can leave them with? Something to really ponder as they, light their menorahs this year.
How about this? As you celebrate Hanukkah this year, think about what this ancient story of resilience means to you personally. What sparks of hope can you find in the face of, your own challenges in your own life? How can you be that source of light for others?
That's a beautiful way to end our deep dive. So as you light your menorahs this Hanukkah, we hope you'll remember the courage of the Maccabees, the miracle of the oil, and that enduring power of faith, hope, and resilience. Thanks for joining us for this special Hanukkah edition of The Deep Dive.